Thank you for making time to be here. We're going to go through a Learn and Burn today, so I'll give you guys an opportunity to kind of dive into a little bit more of what activities of daily living are, and kind of how they relate to our workouts here in the studio, and then of course what our jobs are delivering that essentially to our members and what we have going on. So to give you guys a bit of a rundown here, we are going to be looking at a quick intro, again just diving in a little bit more on what we're going to be talking about, into the specifics of what ADLs or activities of daily living are. 7 foundational movements and their importance, so kind of getting a first-hand look real quick. We'll go over cueings and how to use them effectively, communication styles and learning, and then finally kind of leaving the floor open to any additional comments or questions that may come up after this presentation. So that being said, just for a quick intro, everything we do here at Orange Theory does surround, of course, a 60-minute workout, right? And it's real convenient, obviously, for the member to book that hour of their day to come in and work out with you guys and get a really solid first-time experience amongst the classroom setting to not just have a workout, but have somewhat of a customizable workout for them in this group. But that being said, part of our job, or what we do to also cater these workouts to these individuals or clients, members, is just create all-around better habits of fitness for them. Of course, intuition through heart rate monitors is something that has a huge emphasis on what we do. But in addition to that, is working on all over mobility and prioritizing activity that surrounds daily living as a whole. Everything we do here in the studio isn't just movement. A lot of it has application out in the real world, and that's what we're hoping to do a better job of strengthening and mobilizing those that walk through our doors, not just giving them more life, but being able to practice that even when they're far gone and beyond what we do here for them. So that being said, we're gonna break down ADLs a little bit more. So ADLs, or activities of daily living, again, are related to one's personal care and for themselves, which is isn't necessarily limited to anything great, rather, but kind of more basically surrounding the idea of like getting in and out of bed, or like in and out of a chair, bathing themselves, driving, clothing themselves, just any functional mobility that like you would probably do, not thinking twice about. Like those things tend to taper off the older you get, and kind of this like if you don't use it, you lose it mentality. Like we want to practice good habits here in the studio as we teach exercise and go through movements, to be really intentional with that. So diving in to this whole Learn and Burn, we're going to essentially look at how we influence the effectiveness of our members' ADLs around starting with the 7 foundational movement patterns. Do anybody, or as a whole, do we know what those 7 movement patterns are before we dive into them?
Squat, lunge, push, press, walking,
Gait.
gait,
Okay.
and hinge.
That's 6.
That's 6.
Rotation.
Rotation.
Cool. So press, pull, squat, hinge, lunge, gait, rotation. Cool. So we're gonna break this down one at a time here, talking a little bit more than what you're gonna see here on these screens, but giving you just a little example with each one of these. For the push, classic push-up, right? Just keep it simple to kind of get a visual of what the exercise is for you. As far as setting yourself up, foundation is obviously where all these things have to begin. So with the push particular movement, the scapula being retracted or compressed down, kind of running along the rib cage, or shoulders down and back. I think we use that term a lot. Getting people set up like kind of this proud posture is going to set you up for success moving through those movements, creating distance between you and an object or the floor, a dumbbell, etc. So it's going to activate kind of that push. And then underneath it, you'll notice muscle engagements, just to get refamiliarized, right, of like what those major movers are between your pecs, triceps, and deltoids, everything kind of moving harmoniously through a push movement. With pulling exercises, a nice example would just be a TRX low row, again keeping it simple and light on the accessories. Similar to a push, setting the scapula is super important. So even as we work with and against gravity, if we're protracted or kind of rounded forward, a lot of that tension through movement is going to sit on the rhomboids, kind of that middle upper back area that we experience a lot. So setting back and creating that, again, that like packed and depressed feeling, lats will be engaged immediately. Yes, rhomboids will get some carryover, but it'll no longer become the dominating factor kind of in that rounded out position. Bringing something towards you, right? Any sort of pulling motion is obviously a pull type, and then again, lats, biceps, With squats, foundation is gonna be your feet. Now, I specifically had the push and the pull starting off because we're going kind of top down, right? So at the end of the day, what I would hope for you as we go through these other movements as well is to notice that the scapula itself needs to be set in all of these, right? Like having that rounded position really doesn't do us justice for a lot of movement. So always consider that packed down or down and back shoulder position as we set up, even with the squat, right? With the feet shoulder width apart, the foundation will offer, or excuse me, shoulder width apart or wider. Having a wider stance will offer lower depth, but may introduce like some unwanted tension through knees depending on the individual. What's up?
Wider stance also engages more glute activation.
Right. A lot of stabilization through the hips. Yeah, there's a lot of great benefits to having a wider sumo stance, right, that we offer as well. Totally, absolutely. Sitting back through the hips and kind of keeping that upright posture, your shoulders, hips, and core kind of keeping that straight line, and then roughly meet kind of this parallel or perpendicular setting between your shins and your torso. So as we kind of work through those movements, body weight squat would be just an appropriate kind of visual, right, as we kind of go through those things. Hinge. A good morning or a deadlift, right? Good morning is comparable with body weight, so it's kind of a nice thing, but either way, it's still that same action. Feet set at shoulder width again. You can always go wider as well. Gives you that same right hip stabilization that we can work on a little bit more. But in order to load the posterior chain, everything has to be kind of set back on the glutes, right? This is always the initiating effort when we like to bend or hinge forward onto something. So that being said, as your hips go back, keeping that scapula retracted, the chest will kind of hover over the toes as a result, and then reinitiating the reset of that stance again all comes kind of through the hips. You never want to lead through the head on a hip hinge. If you do so, like that's immediately going to kind of pull you out and forward, thus putting maybe some tension on the back. It's a huge problem that a lot of people have, and it's something we always need to look out for as professionals. So something to keep in the back of your minds with a hinge. You guys with me so far? Talk a couple more. Okay, cool. A lot of head nods. Lunge, cool. So with this one, reverse lunge, a lateral lunge, a forward lunge, doesn't matter. You can step in really any direction with this, but it's all gonna have that same foundation as our squats, right? So feet roughly shoulder width apart, and then making your move from there. Stepping shorter is always gonna be ideal with these types of lunges, especially to allow that hip engagement. More often than not, just a common error that contributes to a poor lunge is overstepping. It typically tends to lock out the hips, again, low back pressure. If there's not segments moving accordingly through the body, somewhere is gonna get kind of stuck, locked up, and the body's gonna want to take the path of least resistance, which ultimately, if you're giving it resistance, it's gonna want to fight through that, which just gives you a kind of an unnatural feeling in those things. So definitely keep an eye on when we like to assess lunges for people, or individuals rather, members. Going from toes to head is always best practice, right? Ankles, knees, hips, and then working your way up to the chain back to the shoulders, kind of ear, right? Quads, glutes, hamstrings, all great engaging efforts for lunges. Next would be rotations. So standing wood chop would be an ideal process for this. So with a static posture, which essentially puts you in this kind of straight line or this kinetic chain. So soft bend in your knees, again, shoulders down and back, core is engaged, hips are in a nice neutral position. Everything is done through scapular retraction, core engagement, again, soft bending, kind of going over that a second time here. Moving in the transversal plane. So what that means is you can go forward and back, you can go side to side, but there's also this rotation that happens kind of in the midsection, right? So when it comes to standing wood chops or we have dumbbell rotations, things like that. A lot of that is going to start bottom to top. So a good one for standing would be this standing wood chop, or even a what's that, shoulder press rotation. Everything starts from ankle, and then will eventually make its way up to the joints, right? Knee, hip, shoulder, and then you have that full range of motion. On the reverse, it all kind of folds back. So the shoulder, hip, knee, ankle, right? And then lastly, the final one that we'll look at here is gonna be your gait. So walking, right? It's gonna obviously be done more so on the treadmills, maybe transitions between stations. But being in a dynamic posture, really just a movement posture, right? Aligning the core, shoulder girdle, in hips, everything done here is going to be mostly lower body focus, right? And the arms are involved because that's part of the movement system and pattern. But the real engagement here is flexion, rotation, and extension through your hips and your foot placement, kind of giving you that propelling effort, right? As you land on the midfoot, push off, and allow that momentum to kind of take that next step forward. Any questions for me, guys? Feeling good with our 7 foundationals? Can we name them off again?
Push, pull, squat, hinge, gate. Someone else can also put in.
So push, pull, hinge, squat, gate, lunge.
Rotation. Cool. Awesome.
So that, you know,
Yeah.
just like slips out, you know.
So next up would be cueing. How to use them effectively, right? I think cueing can have its biggest benefit and produce its most benefit when we give memorable cues, things that are like authentic, have a lot of energy behind them, and quite honestly a little bit of fun. I know we have some analogies here and there that we like to kind of throw behind some of our cueing. So in my experience, there's 3 solid ways to really engage in those things, something to consider essentially moving forward from today. So one of them is going to be body language. Overemphasizing an exercise can do a lot of justice to give members an idea of kind of how that movement essentially is either set up or executed as a whole. So the orange text has some highlights there. So tempo is a huge one, right? As we go through power days, we don't just talk about the eccentric, the iso, and the concentric movement, but we try to give that timing out. So you moving in an exaggerated, slow, 4 seconds on the way down, pausing in a 2 or 3 second on the way up, where you're explosive, right? Make sure that's translated, not just communicated, but that your body's actually going through those motions. We can see that as well through proper scapular retraction, like those big shoulder roll back before you set up, any sort of like power hip movement, a lot of thrusting efforts can also give that visual cue of like overemphasizing a movement, because that's where we really want that highlight of the exercise to shine. Up next would be joint action. And again, this is just some examples when it comes to actually what the body is doing, giving you a reference point. For instance, push, we typically like to stack our joints, shoulders, elbows, and wrists as we move through that movement. Pulling will give you that same kind of same setup, but with elbow flexion. So as you pull in, your wrist kind of meets that hip, rib cage area. Squatting as you sink your hips back, bending at the knees, and then driving through your heels on the way up. And again, we kind of went over a lot of these in those foundational movements with your hinging, scapular retracted, hips reach back, lunging after a step. You're looking for about 90 degrees in the hips, keeping your knee over your ankle, right? Kind of naming out these parts with your gait. Or excuse me, your rotation. Ankle will move until the knee is limited to then take over through the hips, and so on. And then again in reverse order as you kind of uncoil that system, with the gait being again flexion, rotation, and extension through your hips. Is something to keep an eye on for joint action. Third and final cueing opportunity is just relatability. This is where it kind of becomes the full circle kind of starts to begin with ADLs and the activities of daily living. So now we can look at what the movement does for a person, giving them opportunity to execute, but then now we get to pair it with like something they do in their everyday lives. So that these workouts don't just become a separate thing, but get to fuse together with what they do in their daily lives. So examples for push, like closing a door, pulling, starting your lawnmower, squatting down, like picking up a box from the floor. Kind of go through these lists. Or you guys have any examples that you guys typically will find yourself using during coaching that between any of these 7 movements that you like to kind of throw out?
When we were doing cleans or things like that, and since it's getting nicer, the other day it was like, it's like throwing a bag of soil over your shoulder.
Oh, sure.
Like picking up something as we kind of like start to get more outside, things like that. Gait a little bit as we come into like the inclines, walking up the hill.
Right, yeah.
Like, hey, we got hikes to go through this summer. We got mountains in the distance.
Yeah, I'll say we definitely have, like being in the Northwest, we definitely have that environment to kind of speak about. Kind of hard to get away with that if you're in some flat states. For sure. Anything else, guys? You get particular emotions or relatable Unloading groceries from your car, rotation, that's probably one that I think about a lot. That like kind of picking and moving. Yes?
I thought of one.
Okay, for sure.
When you're in a pool and you push yourself.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right.
No doubt, yeah, as it gets hotter, people want to cool off. That's a good one. That's good, I like it. Last one, communication and learning styles. So, it goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it. As a coach, right, a huge emphasis on what we do, of course, is teaching the class, but it's communication, right? It's communicating what has to be done, how long you have to do something, and then when it's time to move on to the next thing. So being clear and concise with how we communicate is obviously a huge thing, even more so in this particular atmosphere. So again, there's three things to consider, three things I'd like you guys to consider moving forward with now having a little bit more of this concept in the back of your minds about how to communicate these movements and cues to the member, knowing that as we all have probably a different way of learning best, we need to understand that our members also carry those traits of potentially visual, audible, etc. So going through those, with communications, already talked about that slide, moving right into listening, or the listener. Someone who's a little bit more right auditory, not so much visual. I know on occasion we like to see, or rather find ourselves witnessing members who are kind of gazing off in the room during a wakeboard demo, or even looking at the VBA and not necessarily engaging in you personally. So speaking clearly, simply, and precise is going to be a huge opportunity to keep those individuals listening, because they're hopefully making some relation to what you're saying or what they're taking in to what they're looking at or what they're about to go into. So that being said, joint action kind of beforehand might be a really easy way to lean into that so that we can be simple while talking to those individuals. The next one would be the looker. In contrast, the listener doesn't really hear what's going on, but it's like super watching you intently with what you're doing. So that being said, body language, right, might be that emphasis that we want to place on things. When it comes to demoing exercises, our Orange Theory standard is 2 reps at minimum, right, when we demo a movement. But if you find yourself still needing to talk about something, I would really hope you keep moving until you're done with that exercise to explain, and then move on to the next thing, because you may do 2 reps, you may talk about it for a couple extra seconds, and now I forgot what it looks like, but I hear you, but I don't understand what you're saying. So it's good to keep those together as long as you need to talk. That's how long you need to move for. The last one can be very beneficial as well, the disconnected. We've all had those members who either look a little bit lost or are not listening, looking, maybe they ran out to the bathroom, or they just came off an all out, or transitioning for their first floor block, like whatever it may be, like there's something that's not participating or engaging with you in them during that time. And so utilizing that relatability factor through your communication and cueing is going to be a great opportunity to kind of reel them back in. If they don't hear joint actions, they don't hear back-to-backs or themes through the workout, they don't hear about body language or see you perform something. Utilizing phrases or relatable cues like hugging in the midst of a chest fly, or tucking a newspaper underneath your arm for a row. It almost seems out of place, but it's also very much in place, or involving what we're doing, right? Squashing the bug on your back within a bridge position, right, to kind of keep that tension. All great things to consider to kind of rope back in those that may be mentally or physically wondering about the studio. That being said, that is our ADLs in a nutshell, right? Your 7 foundational movements, understanding cues, how to kind of get them set up accordingly, and then looking out for members that kind of need that particular type of communication, because we're always teaching to a classroom, right? But having our orange eye out, there's always this individual kind of status that we need to make sure we're locating. So any lasting thoughts, questions? You guys ready to burn?
Yeah.
Yeah, great, okay, awesome. Cool, thank you so much.